can't do Mountain Dew.
I don't do Mountain Dew.
No, I don't do the dew. What did they have in wine or beer? I suppose. But that's not your thing.
Okay, it's 6 p.m. It's September the 4th, 2025, and I'm calling this meeting of the Trophy Club Planning and Zoning Commission to order. We have a quorum, and first item on the list, or the agenda, is public comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to address the board, the commission, on any matters pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.007. The commission is not permitted to discuss or take action on any presentations made concerning matters that are not listed on the agenda. Presentations are limited to matters over which the commission has authority. Speakers have up to 3 minutes or the time limit determined by me. Each speaker must have submitted their request to speak by completing a speaker's form or by emailing our administrative assistant. Jackie, do we have has anyone signed up to speak publicly?
No.
Okay.
You're going to be during the public hearing.
Yeah, there's a difference. Everybody gets confused on that. This just would come up and talk to us on this. But if you signed up to speak on the specific agenda item, that's when we'll do that. Okay? Is everybody clear on that? So there's nobody wants to speak just for fun. Okay, good.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 1, which is the proposed zoning change. We're to conduct a public hearing and make a recommendation to the town council amending section 14.02.052 definitions, section 14.02.103 use table, and division 5 supplementary district regulations of Article 2 zoning ordinance of chapter 14 zoning of the Code of Ordinances, Town of Trophy Club, Texas, by updating regulations pertaining to nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, and community homes, and establishing for the registration of such operations, provided that this ordinance shall be cumulative of all ordinances. Okay, before we start the public hearing, we're going to adjourn into an executive section for some guidance from our attorney, starting now. We'll be back.
I'll stay here.
read, and so I'm going to open a public hearing on agenda item number 1, proposed zoning change at 6:18 PM. We're going to have Tamara Smith make the town's presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. We are going to go over the feedback from the Town Council as well as the P&Z joint meeting that we held in July, as well as our resident input session that happened in August. Just to go over kind of the feedback that we had and then how it's incorporated in the ordinance. So with the council feedback, they were really looking at making sure that the reasonable accommodation review stayed at the ZBA level, as well as on-street parking. They also wanted state agency reporting, property improvements, resident background checks, which our attorney has advised against it, so that is not in the ordinance. And then for the ZBA and P&Z joint meeting, we looked at parking, so specific parking requirements. We looked at the inspection protocols, annual inspection process, community notification process, so the post-approval flyers and letter notifications. We also looked at property restrictions, public education and violations. And then we also looked at legal review, just looking at whether the town could exclude certain parts of residential districts, and then the steps that the town will have to inspect the properties, as well as permitting and establishing a permanent inspection fee schedule. So for resident feedback, pretty much they were looking at making sure that parking, so House Bill 2464, the home occupancy bill, that the regulation of that parking is included, and trash, making sure that we have something in there that stipulates medical waste under the 26 TAC 553 information. So with that, I'll let you know what we've incorporated into the ordinance. So for parking, in the ordinance, we have the assisted living facility and nursing home facility must use off-street parking and may only use on-street parking directly adjacent to the property front lot line. Community homes cannot keep more vehicles than the number of bedrooms either on-site or adjacent of the right-of-way per the Texas Human Resource Code 123. For distance requirements, that was something that was brought up. In the ordinance, it states that the community homes may not be established within a half mile of another community home as required by Texas Human Resource Code 123. When we were looking at ownership and leasing, through the ordinance, it states that if the property is not owned by the applicant, the operator must provide a notarized statement of the consent for the property owner. For the reasonable accommodation notifications, reasonable accommodation request may be filed with the Community Development Director. If granted, the town may notify property owners within 200 feet of the community home and provide them a copy of the regulations. Appeals will go to the ZBA. We also have hazardous areas, so the ALF's community homes must comply with subdivisions and zoning regulations for residential areas, and any non-residential improvements require a reasonable accommodation. There's no explicit prohibition of hazardous areas. For the trash and waste disposal, we have in there that facilities must comply with town trash regulations. We just improved our trash regulations in the ordinance, so it is very good right now with the information that's in there. And then we also have in there a facilities generating medical waste must comply with state disposal regulations, and failure is both a local ordinance violation and reportable to the state. For the registration and inspections, we have the annual registration requirements with the Community Development Department that will have a lot of details on it, so that we can make sure that we have the owner, operator, license, and emergency contacts. And then inspections may occur at the registration, renewal, CO application, or upon complaints. We also put in there failure to comply may result in a CO revocation. We also spoke about that. And then for reporting violations, it's stated in there that the town must report violations of state law to the Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services or other licensing agencies. We do have a fee schedule in there. I don't know if y'all remember, but we spoke about the fee schedule, making sure that it was a reasonable fee schedule. And so what we have in there is the permit application's $300, inspection is $150, re-inspection is $150, and then outside consultants, we also have in there for lawyer expenses and administration cost. So in short, the ordinance codifies parking restrictions, distant limits, owner consent, annual registration, inspections, reporting of violations, medical waste compliance, and reasonable accommodation procedures with clear timelines, fees, and enforcement. So I believe we took in every consideration from the town council, P&Z, and ZBA, as well as residents' input, and we incorporated this into the ordinance to have a really good enforcement for new community homes, ALFs in Trophy Club. So with that, we'll open it up for conversation. If you have any comments or any feedback.
I think we need to finish the public hearing before we
Yes.
go into
Oh,
comments.
yes, sorry.
But before we finish the public hearing, part of the public hearing is public comment. And I understand we do have some people signed up to speak. Jackie?
Yes, sir. First, we have Pat Kiefer at 216 Fresh Meadow Drive. Ms. Kiefer has provided handouts, which I have placed in front of you, and she also submitted comments via email, which you all have a copy of.
Hi, y'all. For the record, I am Pat Kiefer, and we've lived at Fresh Meadow since 1984. We actually voted to incorporate the town of Trophy Club so that we would have control of our zoning. That was I don't know how much you know of the history, but that was the #1 issue on why we incorporated. For 20 of our 41 years, we lived next door to a rental property. Only the zoning kept some of the more outrageous behaviors of the tenants under control. You may have read my prior written, not for this meeting, but the one prior to it, comments that after Brandon asked me to participate in this effort, I read the foundational law. Doesn't mean that I retained it all, it just means that I read it, remembered a lot of it. And I also asked the town for the 1,042 emails relating to the now bankrupt Silverleaf facility. And I read those as well. So the comments come from there, as well as talking to Sarah and other owners in the neighborhood. So while I wish to safely welcome community homes as required into our residential neighborhoods, I have 3 broad concerns about the draft ordinance. It doesn't include the areas, if you look at this handout. The black areas are the ones that are included in the ordinance, and I don't understand, and maybe you all know why the PDs are not included. Our PD 27, which is one of our largest areas, is not included in the governance or the protections that this new ordinance would offer. The other thing is our commercial areas are not included, and we may want to discuss or consider having our commercial areas included, or our churches, as an example. I'm aware in other communities that churches have been converted into community homes, and that may be an advantage that we want to take advantage of in the future. Number 2, the draft ordinance appears to focus primarily on permitting the community homes And not all of the things that happened to the poor neighbors on Oak Hill have been addressed. This type of business operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without providing taxable income to our town. And I know you've heard in the past the complaints about the traffic, and there's a video that Sarah recorded that I had not seen until last month, that she was worried about being able to get out of her driveway because of the traffic and parking in her neighborhood. Our town services like school buses and trash trucks had a hard time getting down the road. And the two-way street was often a one-way street because of parked cars and deliveries. And the trash, it's not just trash, it's the volume of trash. They have 5 containers that are always on display, and they contain human waste. And on a hot day like today, it's going to produce quite an odor in the neighborhood. When they redeveloped the property, they killed a number of mature trees, and that's not currently covered in our ordinances. All the parked cars means that anyone who lives on that street has their right to have their visitors, attendees of birthday parties, football parties, their parking is now limited, so their parking rights have been abridged. So what I'm looking for in this ordinance are that we take advantage of being able to take specific actions to address these issues, as well as having what I call teeth in the ordinance to get that done. The fact is, however this is painted, this is a commercial operation that came into our neighborhood and basically took a quiet residential street and turned it into a commercial property. Without being embarrassed about protecting our neighbors, I think we need to fix this with legal and appropriate pieces of our commercial codes to manage future commercial companies who want to come in and run community homes in our residential neighborhoods. And I don't know who put together the retreat package for the town council, but I certainly am grateful that they included House Bill 2464. Anybody want to raise their hand and take the compliment? It's a very nice thing that, and I've given you all a handout of that says, we as a municipality have the authority to regulate a home-based business. I don't know anything that is more home-based than the community homes that we're talking about. So with that authority, I think we ought to take advantage of putting some regulations in place that help specifically address the things that happen to our poor neighbors on Oak Hill. So with those things in mind, I offered 27 suggestions and comments on the draft PDF, and I'm hoping that you took it with the spirit in which it was intended, which is to assist in structuring the ordinance to safely welcome into our community residential neighborhoods while protecting what makes Trophy Club a great place to call home. Now, I can go through probably about half of those if you're willing to listen. But it will take more than a couple of minutes, so may I?
You can continue.
Okay, thank you. On page 1 in the opening whereases, I think it's really important to highlight that we're already making a number of accommodations in our town zoning. Something along the lines of, whereas town council recognizes the community homes represent a commercial multifamily dwelling facility operating in a single-family zoned residential area that will disrupt the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. With the bankrupt Silverleaf facility, we have historic statistics that show 100 times more ambulance calls than a typical home in Trophy Club. and possible structural changes that are to the detriment to the original use permit for a single-family home. I think that's a strong statement to let folks know that we recognize already we've made accommodations. On page 2, chapter 247, Health and Safety, states that provided that the exterior structure remains compatible with the surrounding residential dwellings. Well, I think the neighbors on Oak Hill will tell you that the excessive traffic, trash, and parked vehicles really changes and is not compatible with their neighborhood. So we need to have the teeth to address that. On page 3 in section 3, I suggest that we add 3 items. The first and foremost is limiting the number of people in the facility. If we don't limit it, well, let me say that another way. The correlation between the number of ambulance calls and the number of people in the facility is 1-to-1. So if you want fewer ambulance calls and less disruption to the neighborhood, I think the only way you're going to get that is to limit the number of occupants and live-in staff. So I picked sort of 6 out of the air. I've seen that in other regulations in other towns. The second thing I'd recommend is that we specifically state that the garage space cannot be converted. One of the emails that I saw in the Silverleaf facility was that we actually approved one plan that had renovating the garage space. So if we explicitly state it in the ordinance, I think we'll do better for ourselves. And the third thing is, if there's any question about accessory use, the base zoning for that area should apply. Number 4, on page 4, section 4, part B, they're talking about the types of violations, life-threatening violations, civil violations. I recommend that we add a section called neighborhood violations so that we have some specifics in here that say it's a violation of the compatibility with the neighborhood. So if we're having difficulty, we have something in the ordinance that says you're in violation of this, and we have a place to put it. In Part C of the applicability and administration in the authorities section in subparts 2 and 3, I would suggest that in addition to the staff community development department, that the Planning and Zoning Commission have authority to act as well. On page 6 in violation section 3A, suggest adding the notice of violation shall be published on the Town of Trophy Club website so that if we're having difficulty with a particular property, it's readily available public knowledge. On page 7, where we're again talking about violations, I would suggest adding a neighborhood violation shall be corrected in 24 hours. And it further states that a certificate of occupancy can be withdrawn. I would suggest appending to that, and/or fines may be assessed. In terms of parking, the last time I submitted a public comment to this group, and I appreciate each one of your service, I had suggested that we limit the parking to the area directly in front of the property. Now looking at the regulations, I look at that and say, if this is really a commercial facility, then I think we ought to apply some of our commercial regulations to this business and require them to have 100% off-street parking for anything that goes on at the property, and take no parking on the street whatsoever. It is the way we run our commercial properties today. We recently had, and I can't remember whether it was this group or ZBA, our favorite barbecue place came and said, we'd like to expand. Well, if you expand, you need to have 12 more parking spaces. Why don't we apply that to this environment as well? and they did find 12 more parking spaces. I also believe that the parking will continue to be a problem for any home business like this. And if there is a violation of this, this would be considered a neighborhood violation, and the person who parked the vehicle receives a ticket, as well as the property owner receives a ticket. So I think that that would change that behavior fairly rapidly. Similarly, on page 7, the waste disposal, I suggest that we add requirements similar to what we see in the commercial environment, where nobody has their trash on display. Now, in the residential neighborhood, the pickups are different, but if they're at the curb outside of the permitted hours, and Tamara's right, we have some nice new ordinance specifications in place, but a fine should be assessed to that property owner. On page 8, in compatibility with residential areas, I would suggest that the first line of defense for the town of Trophy Club for anyone requesting a reasonable accommodation would be this group, a group of neighbors on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And if it's not approved at this level, the escalation would go to the Zoning Board of Adjustments. I would also suggest in that same section that we specify, and it is in the, I can't tell you whether it's state or federal law, that a property like this cannot be located in a 100-year floodplain. I think we should specifically state that in our ordinance. And in the event that a property is redeveloped, such as Oak Hill was, that we require that our tree ordinance, chapter 10.02, is enforced for that property, because as it stands right now, I don't know if you've driven by 261 Oak Hill, but we have a fine collection of dead trees on that property today, mature dead trees. On page 8, item 4 suggests that the notifications occur prior to approval, and that it is a must requirement as opposed to a may requirement to surrounding property owners. In terms of enforcement, I looked at what I said earlier about parking. I would fine anyone who parked in front of the house instead of on the property $100, and I'd suggest fining the property owner themselves $200. Similarly, for trash violations, I would call it a neighborhood violation, compatibility violation, and fine the owner of the property $200. On page 9, in terms of fees, one of the things that I noticed in the 1,042 emails about 261 Oak Hill was that more than 100 emails were regarding the sprinkler system from our fire department, because the property owner kept changing the requirements. So they had to do another full review. I mean, that was fully 10% of all the emails regarding the Oak Hill property. And because of that, that led me to the, okay, if people are going to change the requirements and require us to redo our work as a town staff, then they ought to pay us another $300 for that review. And finally, I would suggest adding a section 12. There are a whole bunch of things that would be good for a property like this to have if they're going to be in our community, that we cannot legally require them to do, or at least what I've understood from the meetings that have been held previously. So I put that in a section 12 and said, while it's not a requirement, the town of Trophy Club recommends for the health and safety of the vulnerable occupants, the following kinds of things occur. In terms of access and emergency egress, state that the slope of the property cannot be greater than the ADA standard of 4.8 degrees. Then an ADA curb cut should be made in the front entry sidewalk for ease of egress in the event that the property is on fire. they need to be able to leave and get to the street. You can't do that at the Oak Hill property. I've been in a wheelchair in recent memory, and the slope of that property would have been impossible, even for a physically fit person in a wheelchair, to get away from a burning structure. That any bedroom on the ground level access should have egress that allows a stand-up emergency evacuation. Any structure with a second level should have 2 or more paths for emergency egress and should have windows able to evacuate a person with a minimum width of 36 inches. If you're familiar with the Fall River Assisted Living Facility, obviously quite a bit larger, the number one issue and the reason that 10 people died in that fire on the East Coast is because they couldn't get them out of the facility. And that's why those 2 items were suggested. That every bedroom should have an emergency evacuation route posted. And the fact of the matter is, not our house, but the houses down the street, even though they're not in the 100-year floodplain, it is suggested that any lot that has flooded in the past not be appropriate for a home like this. And currently, according to the firststreet.org website, there are 209 properties in the town of TrophyClub that are expected to flood in the next 30 years. I would suggest that would also not be a good location for a home of this type. For health and safety of occupants, it is suggested that 2 HVACs be installed with a backup generator. For those of us who experienced the almost 9-hour outage of electricity last Friday, fortunately, it was not a very warm day. If it was a day like today, I believe we would have been at the public library because we can't stay in heat like that. The entire structure should be ADA compliant in all bedrooms, bathrooms, hallways, and public areas. All entryways and windows should allow ADA egress in the event of an emergency. And finally, given the vulnerable nature of the population and the lightning strikes that we have in these areas that do cause fires, we would suggest a lightning rod system. Now, this last section is designed to protect the vulnerable occupants, but also the reputation of the town of Trophy Club. These are the things that we cannot legislate and require, but we can say that they're recommended. Thank you very much for your time and attention and for your service. I see that several people are not going to be on the commission in the future, so double thanks for all your years of service.
Who's next?
Next, we have Christine, I'm sorry, can I pronounce?
Yeah, and people don't want to massacre the name, but we answered everything.
Yes, at 105 Seminole Drive.
Okay. Hello. Oh, God, so loud. Hey, I'm Christine Scheig. I live at 105 Seminole Drive here in Trophy Club, Texas. It's over in the Estates. It's R15, and we've been here for 9.5 years. This is my first interaction of coming to one of these meetings, although a friend of mine encourages me to come all the time. But anyway, I want to thank you all for serving on the committee. I know it takes out time from your family and your life and whatever hobbies you have, so thank you, because a lot of us, we don't serve, and I thank you for serving, because I'm not serving right now, currently. But anyway, I don't know all the laws. I think I'm late to the party because there's a lot of stuff that's happened that I'm not familiar with, but I saw this stuff on Facebook about these group homes, and I knew about the Oak Hill situation. But I don't want commercial enterprise zoned into our residential areas for the following reasons. Traffic and parking congestion. Bringing halfway houses, skilled nursing facilities, and adult daycare centers into our residential areas increases traffic and congestion on our narrow streets. When my mother-in-law was at Heritage House of Keller, a commercial enterprise with about 200 beds, it was next to impossible to find a parking spot during the day, because that's how much staff these places require. And our little streets here in Trophy Club are so skinny. I'm in the old area, and there was an estate sale on Forest Hill about 2 weeks ago, and we couldn't even get down into our neighborhoods because there were cars lined up on both sides. At one point, I was trying to leave the neighborhood, and there was these big construction vehicles coming this way, big construction vehicles coming this way, and one of them had to back up, you know, the double trailer situation up out on the street, out onto Indian Creek. And our streets just aren't designed to handle commercial businesses here in the residential areas. And Trophy Club is a very special place, and I don't want people rotating in and out of our community on a short-term basis. Let's keep Trophy Club safe and special by preventing unnecessary traffic. You know, I'm concerned about the safety of the residents when we bring in all the workers to come and work at these facilities. Most people that helped my mother-in-law at her skilled nursing care were salt of the earth, but not all of them. Some of them gave me the willies. So y'all talked about doing background checks on the residents, and I think you decided not to put that into the ordinance. But what about background checks on the workers and the staff providers and all those people that are coming into the facility? I think maybe that could be added to the ordinance. Maybe it's already in there. I don't know. I'm sorry. And then the other issue I have is not everybody in the halfway house, if someone wanted to open up a halfway house here, not everyone in the halfway houses successfully reintegrate into polite society. Those people who choose to go back to their old ways might fondly remember Trophy Club as an easy target. So I would want to up the ante on the ordinance of making it very undesirable for people to want to open up these houses. And I know that in your ordinance, you wanted to have reasonable fees, but I would suggest having them unreasonable fees so that the people don't want to do business here. But I mean, a $1,000 fee for them to get an inspection might not be very much, because from what I understand, the Oak Hill facility charged for each one of those bedrooms $11,000 per resident. So these people have money, they're making money, or they wouldn't be coming in to try and set up these houses. So I think we need to make it unreasonable for them to want to come and do business here in Trophy Club. And there's a reason why communities have zoning in the first place. So let's keep our residential areas residential and not commercial. And that's all. Thank you.
Jack, anyone else?
No, sir.
That's it? Okay. So we close the public meeting, yes, okay. Okay, we're opening up the floor now for questions, answers, comments.
It might be helpful as we get started with the conversation. Just, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind just kind of spending a minute or two explaining some of the implications of the federal law around this topic and kind of where it is that we are today on this topic. Thank you.
Absolutely. Is that, can you hear me? Okay.
It's on.
Just to set a baseline for the commission in terms of the laws that are at play here with this assisted living facility and community home ordinance, we have an interplay between state and federal law as well as the town's own ordinances here. So we have the Texas Human Resources Code, which regulates community homes, requires those to be permitted by right in all residential districts, and that would include any planned development district with a baseline residential zoning district. So planned development districts refer to a baseline zoning ordinance and say that they're subject to all regulations, applicable to whichever residential district is being incorporated into the PD. And then as those residential districts are changed and updated, those regulations are essentially going to be incorporated into the PD. So this does address PDs as well. Additionally, beyond the Texas Human Resources Code, we are also dealing with the Americans with Disabilities Act, because obviously community homes, nursing facilities, these types of residential homes serve individuals with disabilities. The nature of a disability is defined by both state law and federal law. We can't really work around that definition. That's something that we have to work with as well. And additionally, the Fair Housing Act comes into play to preserve housing access for people with disabilities as well. So those are sort of the big three areas of state and federal law that we are working with. And I do also want to mention that while we have, a set of regulations in this particular ordinance that will be specific to community homes, nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, we're also working with the town's remaining body of ordinances. So regulations pertaining to trash, pertaining to parking in general, all of those ordinances will also apply to assisted living facilities and community homes. Just because they're not incorporated into this particular document does not mean that they don't apply. So our ordinances are cumulative, and they will apply to all properties throughout the town. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about any of this sort of regulatory interplay.
Anyone? I think Rachel answered a lot of your questions, Pat, as it relates to PDs, parking, and things like that in a more general way. I mean, one of the things we have to remember, and we went through all these meetings for this very purpose, we cannot have the appearance of trying to herd this group over here. It has to be by our ordinances. So we have to comply, and we've drafted an ordinance based on a lot of input, a lot of vetting from a lot of people here that gives us the best opportunity to protect the residential integrity of the city of Trophy Club. So that's kind of what we ended up with. In and out and dashing in between the cones for the federal and state and laws. And a lot of the other thing too is the state requires a licensing process too. So by the time they get to us, they've been vetted and they've had to comply with a lot of the issues you're talking about. ADA and a lot of other things are already in those regulations that she mentioned. So those are already in place. A lot of the things that we talked about and everybody was concerned about are in place already, not through us, but they also have regulatory authority, inspection authority, and enforcement authority too, not just us. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the state extensively regulates assisted living facilities, nursing homes, community homes. For example, I think background checks came up during public comment. The state does require background checks on employees who will be working at these types of facilities. So that's something that the state already regulates. It's not something that the town necessarily needs to come in and require because it's already being
Right.
taken care of at the licensing stage.
That was my point, is that there are a lot of things points that have been brought up along this entire process that are already covered in other regulatory situations and licensing situations related to these types of facilities.
Yeah, but if I can, I think, big picture here, one of the things that we're trying to achieve is that we know that although their state is there to license these businesses and what's going on with them, the reality is that they don't have boots on the ground able to be here in Trophy Club on a regular basis, observe what's going on, hear feedback from our residents about the impact that's going on for that. And that's really why the recommendation is there for us to put in place a licensing program at the town level that allows us to be eyes and ears on the ground here with that part. So we kind of have like two components that we're trying to achieve with this ordinance. One of them is ensuring that we have a local licensing program in place so that we can review what's going on, right? And be there to report violations that we see, and obviously use our own version of code enforcement to be able to do that. But I'll mention that to them, the more impactful version is to hear from the state about violations because the state holds their license, right? And that's the more important license for them to be held, and so we can then report to the state about what's going on. So that's kind of one component of that really is very important on it. And then the second point is making sure that we are doing all that we can to protect the neighborhood from the secondary effects of having this going on inside that neighborhood. And that's what we're trying to address here is what are the things that we can do to address some of those secondary impacts for it. So you mentioned the idea that we put in there the medical waste component of that. By putting it in our own ordinance, then we can write citations against that as opposed to then having to turn to the state and look for their licensing part of it. So by having kind of both of those elements in place there, where we are trying to protect the neighborhood and we're trying to create a mechanism for us to inspect what's going on so we can report violations, we're hoping that this will the operation of these businesses will be safe, obviously for those who are there, but also have a low impact on the neighborhoods that are around them that have an arguable complaint about the impact that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis from these businesses that operate.
Anyone else? Comments, questions?
Go ahead.
No,
All right,
after you.
Michael, go ahead. Go ahead, and I'll come back.
Just have a number of questions. I think really relates to a lot of the concerns that have been brought up through the public discussion today. And more specifically, just kind of points of clarification. So, Rachel, appreciate you mentioning that the ordinances are cumulative. And so something that maybe just kind of a question for the town is, I think when you enter the community, or at least from coming down Bobcat, I suppose, from Walmart, I think there's a sign that says, hey, on-street parking during these hours, right? There's an ordinance that basically prohibits that. And you'll see that the police, they will go around, they enforce that. So my understanding is regardless of what the use is, whether it's one of these assisted living facilities or a community home, they're subject to the same ordinances, correct? So the on-street parking essentially overnight, right, is by de facto, there are some limitations associated with, what that might look like. So I know during the day that doesn't necessarily address some of the concerns that you were describing, but I think what we're seeing is there are certain guides and bounds that are being outlined here and that exist already in the community to try to help prevent some of the obstructions, I think, from the flow of traffic. So trying to put a positive spin on that. But I was curious, those parking limitations in the vehicles, it's regardless of, and this is a point of clarification, a question for staff. It's regardless of if that's an employee or someone that's being served by the business in the home. Is that correct?
Correct. The ordinance does not make a distinction between the two. We essentially envision the parking enforcement being complaint-driven, such that a resident who is having an issue with parking would report that issue to the police department, code enforcement, and then the town would take enforcement from there.
Okay. And then in terms of the waste disposal, that was another area where I just had a simple question is, how is there a differentiation between the medical waste versus general waste that might originate from a business such as this and specifically in a residential area?
So medical waste is specifically defined by the Texas Administrative Code. So we don't necessarily need to reincorporate that into the ordinance itself because it is sort of a very detailed list of things that constitute medical waste. But assisted living facilities and community homes would be required to comply with state law on that. So if they are producing medical waste, it needs to be disposed of in accordance with state law. So we don't necessarily have our own definition of medical waste, but we will be following the state definition of medical waste by incorporating it into the ordinance.
Okay. And then, so under the waste disposal regulations section, even though it doesn't call out the medical waste in particular and how the state would require a facility of this kind to manage that waste, it's basically assumed as part of the state permitting process, them functioning in this way, they have to abide by those state requirements.
Correct. And the ordinance essentially states if you're producing medical waste, you must comply with state law on the disposal of that waste.
Okay. That's good. One other thing, I don't know if this is actually something that we'd be able to speak to, but it stood out to me that we have a 1/2 mile radius. There's almost kind of like a density of these types of, I'm thinking in terms of compatible land use for these particular types of proposed businesses. So we can have 1/2 mile is essentially the distance apart throughout the town of Trophy Club. We have a general idea of if we did 1/2 mile, I guess, diameter circles in the town, what that might amount to by any chance? Just a rough guess?
You need GIS.
We do.
Wouldn't be more than 6 or 7.
Less than 10, probably.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's gotta be less than 10.
Okay.
I would imagine.
All right. And last thing, so I appreciate everybody's patience. The section on fees, what you all have outlined in terms of what that would look like in terms of reinspection or the permit and things like that, is it generally just to be able to accommodate what is necessary to reimburse the town for what those administrative costs associated with that would be?
So by law, the town is only permitted to assess fees that are reasonably related to the cost of administering the program. So the cost of processing the permit, the paperwork, cost of staff time for the inspection, things like that. I will note that not necessarily all of the inspections that are required for these facilities are included in this list because there is a whole list of fire department fees that will also apply. So any inspection that they're scheduling, something like that, is going to be covered by a fee under the town ordinances.
Sure, okay. And last thing related to fees, so it's not under section 5, but I think there's a good breakdown of the definitions that are associated with kind of the draft language. And there's the life safety violation, critical violation, non-critical violation. Can y'all just elevator pitch version of how does each tier of these violations translate to? Is there a fee or a fine that comes from the town of Trophy Club, or is that actually something that is just reportable to the state or some sort of federal agency that has oversight?
So the definitions particularly come into play when we discuss later in the ordinance the amount of time that a property has to cure the violation.
Okay.
Fines are going to be set by the municipal court. So,
Okay.
you know, I can't say for certain what that fine would be. And if the court would assign a different fine to the different levels of violation. But, yeah, those definitions are most important for that time to cure.
Okay, all right.
Because what's in the default, there's up to 2,000 per violation?
Yes.
Yes,
That's
for
the-
violations of the zoning ordinance.
Correct, yeah, that's the zoning ordinance, up to 2,000 set by the court on that process. So, but remember, in that process, you have to provide an opportunity to abate, right? So you have to kind of go through that process. If they don't do that, then obviously then you're in the citation mode, and then from there, then it's the court.
Okay.
working with.
One last comment is under section 5, and this kind of does go back into essentially where there's fees. So maybe this isn't the particular section where it'd be applicable and kind of what the follow-on comment is here, but to dissuade maybe any sort of entity from taking seriously what we've laid out in the ordinance, perhaps, and trying to fit within kind of the guidelines that, you know, the town sees as best fit to, you know, help accommodate this type of proposed business. Is there any language that would make sense to include that perhaps suggesting that, okay, if you do these things, it will lead to the town reporting, or is that already a by de facto requirement that if we identify that there is something that's an issue, we as a municipality are required to report up what that is to the state and or governing federal body or agency? Is that correct?
Yes, that
Okay.
requirement is in here. I don't know exactly where it is off the top of my head, but it is in here somewhere.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I have nothing else. Appreciate y'all letting me run through that long list.
Commissioner, I was going to add one more thing on the fees. So the state is very big into watching what municipalities and how they fee different things. For example, if you remember, maybe 5-6 years ago, they took, originally, when you would go through the permitting process, we, as building and permitting, we were feeing building permits as per valuation. So we could look at, and it was a $900,000 home, and we were basing our fees off of that $900,000. And the state didn't like that, and they now make us go by square footage. So it's because there was municipalities abusing that. And so when we look at these fee tables, again, we're going to defer to attorneys on that, is making sure that it does not come across as, is that you're overfeeing. There was the other example of solicitation, and they were, a city was doing solicitor permits, and they were doing $200 per day per solicitor. That did not hold up in court. So, again, kind of going back off of your fees, they do look at these fees very carefully on making sure that they are reasonable on fees.
So I think, just quick summary, it's just to avoid the perception of being discriminatory and punitive to anybody making these applications.
Correct. Yes, sir.
And one other thing to address real quick, there's language in there that refers to the, what I'll refer to as a courtesy notice, right, to the neighborhood around when the license is approved for one of these facilities, that there would be a courtesy notice to those that live in that neighborhood. And the language in there is the word may, not the word must. And one of the reasons why, and the primary reason why, is that, think of it kind of like what we don't want is there to be a complaint from the neighboring group that, oh, if I didn't receive a copy of it, therefore that license is somehow invalid, right? Because it did not follow that correct, process. We wanted to make sure that the town 100% intends to provide that notice, right? We don't know if it necessarily gets to them, if if everyone sees it, do they just throw it away for that? But we don't want to create an offense where someone can come back and say, we don't believe the license is valid because we didn't get a notice for this. These are very much courtesy notices that are going out, and they don't hold any weight to whether or not the license gets issued or not to that applicant.
Which is different than what y'all are accustomed of seeing
Exactly,
is,
yeah.
we put out a notice 200 feet. If some of those are not correct, we may end up having to table and completely renotice to make sure that we're meeting the state law. So,
Okay,
Commissioner Jablonski.
okay, back on parking, you're gonna love this. I've been thinking about the correlation between the parking and the number of people that are in the facility. And then you gotta add the staff. And then you gotta add the service people that are coming and going. And I don't know what else you gotta add, but it kinda gets out of hand, I guess. And the parking restriction is, as I read it, we have off-street, and it states that off-street parking is associated with the facility. I don't know exactly what's associated with the facility, but it also states that on-street is just in front of the lot line. Yeah, thanks. And so, you know, I'm looking at a typical residence here in Trophy Club, and I'm thinking that, well, maybe that will accommodate 6 cars. You got 2 in the garage, you got 1 in a driveway somewhere, and you got 3 in front of the house. If there are more than 6 occupants, this isn't going to do it. And I'm wondering, then what do you do? Well, somehow you got to get some more off-street parking. How do you do that? I don't know how you do that. There's got to be some room on this particular lot to expand a driveway, or that's the only thing I can think of. But maybe there's some other way to do it. So my point is this, that I think the two go hand in hand, that if we're trying to limit the parking, which I think we are in the ordinance, to those areas, we are inherently limiting the number of people who can be there. Is that fair to say?
So this regulation really comes into play with community homes specifically. Those are the only ones that are permitted in residential districts. So by law, by state law, they are limited to a maximum occupancy of 6 individuals and 2 staff members. So that occupancy limit is already in play. State law also sets a specific requirement for parking, which I think off the top of my head, I don't have it in front of me, is that the number of vehicles associated with the community home, I think it may not exceed the number of residents living there. Don't quote me on that. Again, I don't have it in front of me. But then the number of vehicles that can be associated with a community home is regulated by state law. So there are some regulations that come into play there. If they wanted to expand, for instance, the driveway to allow for more on-site parking, they would be subject to the town's existing codes, for example, the subdivision ordinance saying how much of the lot can be covered with impervious coverage, or how much of the lot can constitute a driveway, or any other sort of building regulations that come into play with constructing driveways, constructing additional parking space. So they'll be subject to the same regulations that any other residence is.
But they don't use it. You know, we had plenty of parking across, pardon me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Across the street, there was plenty of parking, but they would not use it. They used Sarah Miniatis, 248 Oak Hill Drive. They would not use it. They only parked 1 car there because that person would get a ticket if it parked on the street overnight. All the other vehicles were on our street, parked out in front, some in front of the home, but many on the sides of it. And there were like 10 vendors that would come every day. Did they use the parking lot or the driveway? No. only the landscapers and that one car use that parking space. So if you require them to have parking spaces, please make sure they use them. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
And I believe that's the goal of the provision that states they can only use on-street parking that's adjacent to their front lot line. So they're limited to parking on the portion of the street that is right in front of the house. They can't park across the street, they can't park down the street. And again, that would be complaint-driven. So if residents are observing problems like this, they would be able to report that to to the town, and then the town would be able to take appropriate enforcement action. So that is something that we are trying to address with this.
What does a complaint-driven enforcement look like? Just so if the folks here that live on that street, they observe that there's kind of maybe repeat offenders or these, different types of services parking their vehicles in ways that don't line up with the ordinance, they take pictures, timestamp, send it to the town? Is it just maybe frequency of visits from the town and our code enforcement, or maybe the local law enforcement officials, they observe these things? What's the best recourse here?
But you just asked two questions. You said best recourse, and then what normally happens.
Sure.
What normally happens, I get phone calls, emails, those privileged that have my cell number, text message. So somebody had mentioned the big sale. My phone blew up on that estate sale. I mean, we knew about it, and so it's just normal process for us. I mean, it's daily, all across town. It's not just specific to Oak Hill. It's the entire town.
So burden of proof to be able to enforce something or issue a citation if someone isn't parking in accordance with the ordinance, does it have to be physically in person? Someone from the town sees it themselves and observes it, or is there some sort of other reporting mechanism where someone could be held liable?
We typically will go out. I mean, there's enough on staff, and even PD helps us on things like that. So, but there's plenty on staff for us to go. What we would do with this, because this allows us and does give us teeth that we have not had in the past,
Right.
is we can use a photo, we can go out, take our own photo, and then be able to present that.
So, ma'am, hopefully that provides a little bit of greater understanding of what they're trying to do in terms of enforcement and the teeth. I want to use the words that Mr. Cox offered. I think that's a good way to view it.
Yeah, and we'd gotten, I mean, she and I were on first name basis quite a bit, and her neighbor, and there was a lot of times where we'd get a call saying that it appeared that maybe there was very little room to be able to get between vehicles. And whether it was myself or code enforcement, and then multiple times, I'd reach out to the fire marshal. And Ken would, if he was available, he'd just jump in his truck and just see because he knows if he can pass through, if an ambulance can, if a fire can, or whatever. So, yeah.
And just to provide some additional context for that, so before, the town could only enforce its existing parking regulations, which would address something like the street being impassable and unsafe for emergency vehicles. We didn't have something like we have in this ordinance that would allow us to come in and say, you have people who are parking down the street from where they're supposed to be. That's not allowed, and you can get a ticket for that. Mm-hmm. So that becomes an ordinance violation. It's not just a matter of traffic enforcement anymore. Okay. It's an ordinance violation. It's a violation of their registration with the town as this type of facility. So we do have more teeth, more ability to enforce this type of issue.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make, is that the genesis behind the adoption of this new ordinance language is our existing ordinance is deficient in so many areas, and in some cases just incorrect in total. And so moving forward with this draft is an attempt to address all of those past sins that everybody has mentioned and bring us up currently in an effort to provide better and more comprehensive liability protection to not only the city, but also the residents, and especially those impacted in the areas around the home, and trying to address the things that you've seen as an ongoing basis and try to prevent that from happening in the future. So I think that's why, the draft is the way that it can be written, that it covers the items it can cover, that as a town that we're able to do that. There are some lanes we can't swim in and they mentioned those earlier, is it applies to state and federal. But I think the ordinance as it is being crafted has the town and the citizens' best interest at heart. So,
Okay, number two, House Bill 2464. That seems, and this is just my opinion, I'm going to ask you if I'm, off in left field. House Bill 2464 seems to me that it's directed at, well, it says it's a home-based business, but what's a home-based business? And to me, it's something that maybe some guy is repairing not autos, but lawnmowers in his garage or something like that. Or you're running some kind of home-based sales thing or marketing out of your home. So based on that opinion, I'm thinking that House bill doesn't apply in this case. And yes, these are businesses, but I think they're more than a home-based business. And is that accurate?
So after the town hall meeting, I did look into House Bill 2464 and the language that it referenced, and whether we could kind of exploit that. And I do think that 2464 is broad enough that it does apply to facilities like this. But what House Bill 2464 does, it just allows us to regulate parking. And so it allows us to do what we had already essentially started to do with this ordinance. So we are allowed to regulate parking, and we have this provision drafted to address some of the parking concerns. We can tweak this provision. This is more of a starting point. It is a place where we can start to explore our opportunities for regulating parking. But yes, I mean, I don't think House Bill 2464 is inconsistent with what we're doing.
Okay. So are you saying that we're not done with parking yet, that we have an ability to explore some more?
That's up to you guys.
I'd like that. I'd like to say that. Okay, that's number two. Number three is ambulance runs. This is more of just a suggestion and a thought. I understand, and it makes total sense to me, that ambulance runs are much more prevalent in these types of facilities than they would in a residential home. I'm kind of thinking that, I don't know how many households there are in Trophy Club, but I'm betting that not all of them have one run a year, and some may have a couple, but this kind of situation, I mean, you got more people, number one, and so yes, we're going to have some more ambulance runs. I'm not real sure what that means. Is that Trophy Club EMT, or is that a private company that comes and does this stuff?
It's Trophy Club.
It's okay. And so that's, my thinking is that I think we can make a very good case to say that we can assess fees for excessive ambulance runs. And what's excessive? Well, I've come up with 10 to 12. Anything over 10 to 12 a year, I'm going to say is excessive, and so what? But I think maybe we can look at that and see what we can do about, because it's going to cost Trophy Club, and it's going to cost more than a typical residence in Trophy Club. So I'm thinking that maybe we can look at that and add that to the ordinance as far as fee structure goes.
I can definitely look into the feasibility of that option. It's not something I've explored before. I do want to sort of manage expectations and just note that it's, when we're talking about limiting the emergency services that we're making available to community members, necessarily, we may need to proceed with caution, but I can definitely explore this and see if it's an option for the town.
Yeah, I don't consider it limiting. I just consider it, you pay for what you use. And, our taxes pay for so much of what we use, and we know this is going to be more. And so that's how I see it. Okay, number four. Number four has to do with the registration form. I'm thinking, just to make our lives a little easier down the road, if things should come up, is to put in the state license number, or the certification number that is granted by the state to these businesses, and just have it on the form, ask them for it. What's
I
your,
think it is on the form, isn't it?
It's on the form.
is it?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's subsection D.
Okay, good. Then on that, then strike number 4. And that's all I have.
Anybody else?
So I just have a quick follow-up question on that. The residents of these places are not itinerant. So most of the registration, the operators have insurance. So would not those ambulance calls be handled on an insurance basis? Because I know in some cases, when a resident anywhere else is moved, insurance comes into play. And so there could be a potential reimbursement on those ambulance calls?
Correct, yeah, there are charges for ambulance runs, right, on all that, and then insurance number, or picks up and helps to pay for those things. I don't know the details of the
Right.
specific ones,
But-
right?
But it's not a for-free service that would be entitled.
But that is
just
correct,
grant
yes,
that
that
and
is
move
correct.
it. Okay, thanks.
Is that a question that I just thought of, and I should probably, it just popped into my head, I promise. The half-mile point-to-point of the facilities, was that already in federal and/or state statute, or is that something written in the new ordinance?
The half-mile requirement.
Half-mile requirement, was it already in federal, state, or is that? in our-
Yes, yes, it's
it's
in
already sitting
chapter
there.
123 of the Human Resources
Okay,
Code.
thank you. That was all I had.
I have a couple of questions. For Pat, did they list the 26 houses which are going to flood in the next 30 years? They give addresses?
Yeah, I need to know that.
How many are on Hillcrest?
Well, and what's the source of that data, too?
That was,
One of mine.
it was 209.
209 houses?
209 houses projected to flood in the next 30 years in
They didn't give addresses?
Trophy Club. I did not drill down
Be interesting to
into
know.
that.
Might recommend GIS again.
Just to be sure.
I know who floods on, who has flooded on, in the past on our street. I also worked in 2012 on the first ever stormwater remediation project in Trophy Club to help our neighbors. We had certain recommendations. The town did not accept all of them. They accepted some of them, and as a result, the former mayor's house continues to flood. And had they taken the neighbors' recommendations, it would not be flooding. Same thing with several houses uphill of us. We ourselves carry flood insurance, and knock on simulated wood, we have yet to flood, but then again, we put in mini flood walls, so to help prevent that.
Interesting.
If I may, one other thing on parking that Sarah has commented on is the delivery and pickup of, for example, medical waste. They did have a truck that came every week and took care of the medical waste. That's not taking care of the human waste product that is in the 5 containers of trash that are kept outside the home. I want to comment on the number of vehicles, bedding supplies, food supplies, and so forth that are delivered and picked up. In the our zoned areas, the black areas, all of those zoning regulations state that the Planning and Zoning Commission or Town Council can state that loading and unloading must take place on the premises. The PDs, I think there are 28 PDs, 27, 28 PDs, they are not protected with that. So as an option, the zoning for Sarah's area and 261 Oak Hill, the Silver Leaf, is R-OH for Oak Hill. That has the provision that you as a body or town council can state that all loading and unloading must be done on the premises. So I would suggest that we would incorporate that in this ordinance so that all of the PD people have that same protection and governance, and that it be specified in this ordinance, because part of the trouble was all of these delivery and pickup vehicles were also parking on the street on Oak Hill. So I think that's a defensible thing, and I was very glad to hear that the ordinances are cumulative, but that's only in the R zones, the original zoning of older pieces of Trophy Club, not in the PDs.
Is that accurate?
So the PDs do incorporate their baseline zoning regulations. So if, for example, they reference one of the R districts as the baseline for the PD, then those regulations are incorporated, even as they're amended. I will say, I don't see any issues with including requirements in this ordinance to require deliveries to be unloaded on site. I think that's something that we can absolutely include in the ordinance if that's something the commission would like to recommend.
So I have a quick question on that. Is there a way to draw a distinction between FedEx, Amazon, and, you know, when you start talking about deliveries, you know, delivery is a broad enough term that it very well could be somebody infers that applies to Amazon, FedEx, DHL, anybody else that is routinely servicing the citizens of the town and making deliveries to that premise. So just in my mind, it sounds good to make a delivery on premise. How do you physically do that? You can't have them drive through the yard. You can't have them do something that is not permissible in the town, is a general rule of thumb. So I just think it's a slippery slope to start trying to engage
Plus, the
in
ordinance makes them
language for that.
park in the parking lot in front of the house.
Right.
So
They're,
it's more affordable
yeah,
to get in.
yeah, they're
anyway.
confined to the lot
That's
line
right
of the
now.
house.
Yeah.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's covered by default, and if we try to take it further, we run the risk of negatively impacting typical daily services for the rest of the residents. I can just see that happening.
I mean, there are some ways that we could try to address that. We could try to accept common carriers, for example. But, you know, that could start to get us to the point where we're creating an unwieldy ordinance that becomes very complicated for the town to enforce as well. But that's something that is within your discretion to consider. So, yeah, that's up to your deliberations.
Any other comments, questions?
Just one more, and it's actually related to the insurance came up, which is interesting, and I wonder how, I think this town, this community prides themselves in being overall maybe a higher level of quality. There's, so going down like that train of thought, the quality of care perhaps, that if one of these facilities is gonna be in our community, and we support that, right? I mean, there's good reason. Are there certain things that we can recommend, not require, but recommend within the ordinance that helps maybe elevate or achieve kind of a higher level of care? So insurance related, I mean, is there an opportunity for us to recommend? So I know there's long-term care coverage, there's other types of insurance that can come into play, just maybe regular health care, things like that. Can we recommend in the ordinance that folks that are receiving care at these facilities have insurance? Is that, and again, it's not necessarily binding, but is that something that is within our purview? Is that permissible?
I think when it comes to imposing regulations on, you know, the residents who will be taking advantage of these services, I think that becomes a lot trickier because that is something that's going to be regulated by state law. But, I mean, you know, technically we can put any sort of recommendation in the ordinance, we just can't enforce it. So it just depends on how much you want to go down that road.
Okay.
Anything else? Anyone? I have a question, just in general. Had this ordinance, proposed ordinance, I mean, it was obviously drafted to address the problem that was created by Silverleaf and get us in compliance with federal and state statute, which the Supreme Court told us we had to do that, basically. It's not something we dreamed up. It's been litigated. But had we had these ordinances in place, would we have had some of the discussions we've had tonight as it relates to 261 Oak Hill? in general.
Well, Oak Hill would be there,
Right.
but they would be limited quite a bit. So the parking would have been addressed, the amount of spaces, the amount of occupants
Right.
in there would have been addressed, amongst, you know, a lot of the other things that the citizens have brought up and that y'all brought up.
So I'm just trying to put a positive spin on this because it is designed to create a scenario we don't get back into this situation.
Correct.
Yeah, and I'll bring up another one, which is that we've heard from residents that they had converted one of the garages into living space on that part, and I don't believe that was permitted.
No.
At all. So if we had been inspecting the home,
Right.
right, we would have been able to see things like that and obviously address those issues with the property as opposed to, you know, it being kind of, you know, something we hear, but we don't have any evidence of on that case, so.
Anything else, guys? Do we have a motion to make a recommendation to the city council for approval of this particular ordinance change?
Well, I'd like to make a motion for approval, and I'd like to add three considerations to that. One of which is to consider the impact on parking for House Bill 2464 that it has, which, you know, look at that a little bit further. The second one is for the excessive ambulance run fees. And the last one is for the on-premise unloading and loading, to further consider that.
Okay, do we have a second?
So maybe just understanding the motion by Commissioner Jablansky. So I think what I'm understanding to be the case is that you are recommending approval with, not approval, recommending that we proceed and this goes to council with three considerations. So there's no specific language tied to this, just consider these three additional things as a
Right.
part of the final ordinance language. Okay.
And I believe what the intent of your motion there is to make them more if we can, to make them more restricted than they exist in the language today. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All
I
right. Just
think-
want to know
But
which direction we're
Is
going.
this a proper format to do that, though?
It's not improper. I think we do need some more specificity
yeah.
so that, well, it's lawyer language, I'm sorry. I do think, however, that we need some more specificity on what exactly we are recommending to town council. So instead of just saying, you know, we want stricter parking regulations, we may need a more stringent recommendation on what that would look like.
Yeah, so for example, if you're saying, you know, no on-street parking, that might be one version of it, right? There is language in the about the number of vehicles per the number of bedrooms. That's actually in there. I saw it
Yeah.
on that part. So if there's a reduction of that amount that's in there, that would be helpful too. I think we need to kind of know, like, to what extent.
Well, yeah, as far as the parking goes, I got the impression that there's maybe some further language we could put in. I don't know what that language is. And I got the I know that I think the parking can be restricted just by the fact of the impact on the neighborhood, which before we didn't have the language to, I guess, enforce that. And the parking also impacts the number of residents in these homes. And we have the language in here that the parking is restricted to off-street that's associated with the facility. So what's associated with the facility? Residents, staff, maybe even deliveries and, you know, those kinds of things.
So to give you some guidance on what associated with the facility means, that would be any on-site parking that is available in a garage or a driveway. So that's the number of spaces that are associated with the structure.
Okay.
In case that's helpful. I do think, since we are continuing to deliberate, if you don't mind, would you withdraw your motion for the time being? So that we can just take that off the table, continue deliberating, and then we'll revisit a motion shortly?
And revisit. Yeah, okay. We'll take it off for now.
Okay, so he's withdrawing the motion.
Withdraw it.
What I'm trying to get to is, we have, we put a lot of work into the language that's in the proposed change in the ordinance for a lot of reasons we've talked about. And I think there's as Rachel mentioned earlier, there are ways that we can send this on and say, consider this. However, we would like for the council staff to look into these three areas prior to the next, and have some suggestions there that may be available to them when they deliberate on this issue.
Yes, I just think we need some specific recommendations as to what the commission thinks that would look like. So if we're recommending more strict parking regulations, we need to recommend what those regulations would be.
So in the instance of parking, on-premise or even on-street versus off-street, I think we understand what on-street is. Off-street includes only paved areas of, say, a driveway. You cannot park in the grass. So, I mean, if that provides a level of clarity of, we're not talking the premises at large. It's specific to the driveway and then, of course, the garage area, whatever that might lead to. So,
Well, yeah, my thinking is that let's say there's 6 residents, and there's 2 staff. That's 8 spots. Okay, so if we stick with the in front, by their front property line, I'm thinking you can get 3 cars there, or 3 vehicles. And if they're really big pickups, maybe not, but you can maybe get 3. It's usually a 2-car garage, that's fine. And you can probably stash one in the driveway somewhere so that you still have ingress and egress. So that's 6. But if there's 6 residents and 2 staff, they need 8. So those 8 need to be on premises. Well, on and off, because that's the math, 3, and then, so what are they gonna have to do? They can only, there's only 6 available. Now we're gonna have to do something with the driveway. That something might change the fit with the neighborhood. Trees might have to come down, those kinds of things. And so, and House Bill 2464 might give us some more leeway. I don't know what that leeway is, but that's what I want to consider. Can we look into House Bill 2464 more and do a little bit more for parking restrictions?
So the way I read the ordinance draft is the number of vehicles is not limited by the number of residents, it's limited by the number of bedrooms. So if you have a 3-bedroom house, you have 3 vehicles. Now, you may have 2 people in each bedroom, but that doesn't say you get a car for each resident. You get a car for each bedroom. So if you have a 4-bedroom house, you would be entitled to 4 vehicles, and then your caregivers or whatever else. So you have that limitation in there based on bedrooms currently, and in some of these, the people very well may not have a vehicle that come. They might not be in a condition to drive. So, I mean, you would have that by default, but if you're limiting it to the number of bedrooms, I don't know if we have any 6, 7-bedroom houses.
Well,
here
once they get done with it,
in
we don't
TrophyClub.
know how many bedrooms they're gonna have.
Well, we would know, because they would have to
Yes,
have a
yes.
permit to expand the structure and
Correct.
go through the town's permitting process and building
So that
regulations.
there could be more
Right.
bedrooms.
and Rachel brought up, go ahead.
And the other, I guess the thing is that possibly, and maybe the House bill could eliminate some on-street parking.
So to provide a sense of what House Bill 2464 allows us to do, the only guidance that it provides is that we may regulate parking associated with a business. So it's not particularly helpful in determining the extent of how much we can regulate parking. It just says that we can.
Okay,
So-
we can, so.
Right, so
look
we can
into that
regulate,
further. Yeah.
yes, and we can explore our options. The key thing to keep in mind is that we don't want to regulate parking so much that it completely precludes them from operating.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
No, we don't want to do that, but we want to take the neighbors and the residences
Absolutely.
into consideration as well. And so that's what I'm trying to get to. How do you say that? I don't know.
Is mention of the tree ordinances, or, go ahead, Brandon.
I was just saying, I think the distinction here really is between, I don't think there's any question from anyone about the idea of off-street parking, right? Off-street parking, that part being limited to the number of bedrooms, things like that. I think the nature of your question is, should the on-street parking be eliminated? And I think that's what you're asking is would the House bill allow for that provision to be eliminated completely from the on-street parking? Is that right?
Well, that's maybe the dream. It may
Yeah.
not, that may not be able to happen, but to address the parking situation further, yeah, if there's, it seems like the House bill gives us some ability to rethink this a little bit and shift things around possibly eliminate on-street parking.
Yeah, because that's what we've done in the current language, right? Right now, the general rule is park on the street legally and you're okay. We've restricted it down to the lot lines of that property for on-street parking, right? So then, we are using that type of language, right, as a business there to be able to restrict their parking down to only in front of the house.
Right.
Or then the question becomes, if you go further than that, what happens,
Exactly.
with that part of
And
it?
can we?
And I think that's,
Let's look into it, that's all I'm saying.
yeah.
So for me, it brings up another question. What do you do with family?
What do you do with what?
Family.
Right, if there's guests.
So if there's guests that come in, if we eliminate on-street parking, where do we put family when they come up to visit the people in there? You've already told them, no, you can't park on the street. There's no spaces on the premises, so do you have them
What
park?
do we do with
where?
family now, within a residence, the football park?
Park on the street.
They park on
They
the street.
park on the
Yeah, park
street.
on the street.
Yeah.
But there
It's a-
won't be any spots on the street if those spots are already taken.
So I think the operating assumption here is that each person that's occupying a bedroom also has a vehicle which on-site, right? Whether parked on-street or off-street. But even,
yeah.
think about it, they cannot 24 hours park on-street, right? That's a violation of a current ordinance. And then there's, building regulations or restrictions come up, tree ordinance and things like that. So they can't necessarily build just a big concrete pad in the front of the home, right? There's, the impervious surfaces and things like that and the
Yeah.
limitations associated. So there's certain things that are built within, I think I can't remember the language that you used earlier, but the foundational ordinances that kind of get tied into PDs and other zoning. So the clarifying question though, as this comes up, the ordinance and the parking, both on and off street, it's associated with guests of the facility, employees of the facility, and also people that are receiving care at the facility?
Right, it would apply to any person associated with the facility.
Correct.
Sounds complicated.
Yeah, and so and just in my mind, I know the house on TrophyClub Drive that expanded the driveway. And it was really nice, and they thought, we've expanded our driveway, so we will angle park. So they're no longer in head-in. So they have 6, 7 vehicles on a typical driveway extension. When they park angled, all the vehicles fit. They're on premise, they fit. And they have room.
Wasn't that a sales office for the developer originally, and that's what
Yep.
those are put in?
And that's how that
And once they were
hey,
given the
yeah.
approval to put them in, they're just there.
Yep, and they're on premise, they all park, they're not blocked in, so they're not bumper to bumper, as they're going through there.
But would that get approval today if it was?
Right, so I don't know. I think
I'd
that
say
would go
probably
to
not, wouldn't
ZBA or somewhere like that, to get recommended, but how would you define in a grant of a driveway extension like we do for boats
Yeah.
and other things, that you couldn't angle park on? So I just think at some point, we begin to craft something that's so unwieldy that it limits our ability to enforce what we may have today. That's just my thought.
What if a neighbor parks on street in front of one of these businesses and blocks their ability to fully utilize how do we approach that? And do we need to think about the services that they're gonna offer, guests that may be coming? So perhaps the neighbors nearby, has that come up during conversation?
I know we, during one of the conversations, we had the idea of, should we use placards or things like that to help enforce all of this? I think that's more of an enforcement tool that we'll have to kind of look at later on. I think the result would be if someone from the neighborhood parked in front of their house, it would just be
It limits.
taking up a spot, right? If that they would have, because their regulations don't allow them to expand beyond that just because someone parked in the spot, right? With that part, so it would limit their ability.
Okay.
I have two things I want to bring up, Paul, on the deliberation. I think bringing it to council, like Rachel mentioned, we need to still define that, right? What do we need to do there? But on your other 2 points, I think I have some issue with it. So on the excessive ambulance charges, I just don't know if that's the best thing for us to be meddling into. You know, I can picture it now. You know, Trophy Club will start charging if you use your ambulance, their ambulances too much. You know, I just don't like the look of that. I don't want people second guessing emergency services either. Do I need to call? Blah, blah, blah. Right? And it could be, I get the spirit of what you're saying, but I'm just not sure if I want that under consideration by anybody. You know, it's emergency service, use it. If you need it, use it, right? And then the second part of the on-prem loading, unloading, like my fellow commissioner here mentioned, I also just don't know if I want to meddle with Amazon and try to get language and just go down this slippery slope of this Amazon truck parked in front of my house for too long and my neighbor called and it's just, you know, becomes a nightmare.
Well, I think we can make a distinction between a simple delivery and unloading a truck.
Well, but
I'm not
again,
sure
I
how you
think
make that
I don't
distinction.
think so, because.
I'm not sure how you make that decision.
Yeah, I think the language then becomes so subjective that you open the town up to increased liability because somebody has to interpret
Yeah, they had 4
verbiage
boxes
that's
instead
in
of
there.
6.
So do you put a time limit of 5 minutes on an unload versus 2 minutes versus 30 seconds? I think it's so subjective that it opens up the town to increased scrutiny and liability. And I don't know that we want to go down that slope. That's just my opinion. I understand what you're trying to get at, but a lot of the deliveries, they may be a one-time occurrence. The rest of the time they come in, they deliver food. So you're gonna bring food in, or you bring in laundry supplies, you know, linens or something like that. There's a normal time that takes, and then they're gone. And I think anything beyond that is we try to adjust with language, then becomes subjective for somebody interpreting that language. And so that just tends to open up, what if the provider says, I think you're being punitive and discriminatory and trying to run me out of town by confining me to 3 minutes to get something off a truck. I just think it's an area that we really don't have a lot of success in going forward. I think the idea is great, and I understand where you're coming from, but I think at the end of the day, the interpretation could put us at risk and put us in a situation that we really don't want to be in. It's just my thought.
Yeah, so I think my recommendation would be we focus on the parking consideration for council, what we want to put in there, and continue with that.
What do we want to put in there, if anything, right now? Or is that something that be kicked down the road, it can be kicked down the road for future amendment to this ordinance once we get some more input from council?
We could absolutely amend the ordinance in the future. You know, if, you know, one approach that we could take is just seeing how this plays out. You can also decide to restrict parking further at this time. It's entirely up to you.
Commissioners, I'll be frank with where my position is right now, is I think we should recommend for approval with the language as is. And partially because currently within the community, we have 0 instances of one of these. If we were maybe approaching that point where, whether it's half a dozen or 10 in the community, and there was an ongoing issue that needed to be addressed, and we need to come in and amend, and perhaps look at something more restrictive, because we had some data to back that up. I just think talking a lot in the hypothetical, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, I have a challenge getting from where we are right now to something that's more restrictive. So, again, generally speaking, I think the language as proposed is something that I would support making a recommendation for council to approve.
Any other comments or questions? How about a new motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, let's make sure we clarify that motion. As presented in the
Do I need to read this?
I think it would be helpful
I
just for
I
her to
will.
read it.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed zoning, let's see.
You can say as presented in the agenda caption.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
it's the only
Write that
item on the
down.
agenda.
The only item on the agenda.
I think we're clear.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Any further discussion or comments on that? I call the point. All in favor? Opposed? Paul? Okay, motion carries. Item 2, if y'all want to stay around for item 2, it's a pretty good one. Consider the approval of the August 14th, 2025 Planning and Zoning meeting minutes.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 7:54 PM. Thank you all for your input, everyone. Interesting. Very interesting.